What is, in your opinion, the biggest butterfly effect ever? And some Italian approached the Spaniards, and then the Portuguese, and suggested to just go around the world to get spice. So the Portuguese eventually said yes. And I think you know the rest of the story. It was probably Spain who sent him, not Portugal. Had Bill Clinton resigned in the wake of sexual harassment allegations in which the Monica Lewinsky affair was discovered and made public, and Al Gore would have become president, this likely would have given him enough incumbent advantage to defeat George W. Bush in the 2000 election. Our reaction to 9/11 likely wouldn't have included to Middle Eastern wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, saving thousands of lives, preventing the creation of ISIS, and numerous other ripple effects. I'm not saying Clinton should have resigned, but if he would have resigned, which many thought he would, how a volcano eventually led to modern paved streets and traffic. Somewhere around 1800 a volcano erupted in Indonesia and sent a huge dust cloud to Europe which basically cancelled summer. All crops die. A famine was the result. So people ate their horses. So, without horses, no one could move around. So dude invented a horse on wheels, the bicycle. And since riding on hard wheels breaks your back, someone else invented a tire with air. This led to paved roads because tires work well on hard surfaces. And then eventually we had roads, cars. The accidental burning of the Great Library of Alexandria. Human knowledge was possibly set back over 1,000 years by that one event. Other possibility, Hannibal not taking Rome when he had the chance. If he did, human civilization in Europe could have been defined by Carthaginian norms rather than Roman norms. Roman culture had on Europe and by extension all New World nations, then, well, let's just say that it's impossible to know what our world would look like today if Rome hadn't won the Punic Wars. A scientist named Charles Wilson wanted to study more about clouds and invented a box, now called a cloud chamber, with a contained atmosphere that could synthesize clouds. It was later found that this box let you see subatomic particles interacting with the atmosphere it contained. This opened the door to direct study of particle physics. Previously, this branch of physics was all theory. This breakthrough led to the discovery of the power contained within splitting an atom and ultimately to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In the 90s, it was commonly understood that Donald Trump was a washed-up loser who sucked at business and was a known rapist. Jokes on shows like Pop-Up Video, etc. And since the Trump name was basically useless, he was looking to license it to people, and Mark Burnett approached him and asked him to use it for The Apprentice. Trump became the host of the show, which conned a ton of viewers into thinking that the character he played on their show was real and ... here the fuck we are. Maybe too big an event to qualify, but Lincoln's assassination. Johnson had no interest in pursuing actual reconstruction and allowed the southern states to rejoin with only superficial changes to their way of life. Slaves became sharecroppers. The US remains heavily divided, and the split defines the entire political cultural profile of the country today, not to mention throwing a wrench in the trajectory of black civil rights, something that wasn't legally resolved for another century. Personally, one time I was dropping my son off at school. My cell phone dinged, and I looked down at it. At that exact moment, the light turned green, and I didn't notice it. I looked up just in time to see a semi-truck go directly through the red light right into the path where I would have been traveling. It would have decimated me and my car. Had I not looked down just to see what that text message was, I would have went through the green light and probably been obliterated. Hitler's boss wanted to send the armored Panzer Division to stop the Normandy invasion, but they needed his approval to do so, which they couldn't get because Adolf got fucked up the night before and didn't want to wake up. That's happened since then. The outcome of W2, the US and Russia becoming superpowers, the Cold War, all the shit in the Middle East, like fucking everything, is because Hitler was hungover one day. The Catholic Church from 1227 to 1241 is often remembered for issuing a papal bull declaring that cats bore Satan's spirit, which subsequently led to huge numbers of cats being killed throughout Europe. The mass extermination of the continent's felines is considered an indirect cause of the bubonic plague spread by fleas on rats, which would otherwise have been hunted by the dead cats. Was sad about my job and life, so started watching funny Kelly Clarkson interviews and videos. Got tickets to BBMAs hoping she would host again. Was trying to find out information on host for the year and joined Twitter. Found a Kelly Clarkson fan base and started messaging with one of them from a different country. Fell in love and moved my now wife and son to the US. I didn't even know I was into women before her. There was a dude guarding prisoners in ancient China. The prisoners were being taken somewhere in a van pulled by horses. For whatever reason, it crashed and the prisoners all escaped. Owing the penalty for letting the prisoners escape would be death. Ran after the prisoners, joined them, became their leader, built the gang into an entire army, overthrew the state and became emperor. In 2005, some nerdy kid on the internet that went by the handle Mood was obsessed with anime and Japanese culture finds out about an obscure, yet wildly popular website in called Chan. Only problem is, it's all in Japanese, so the kid copies all the source code and decides to start his own English version called for Chan. Yada, yada, yada. Trump gets elected in 2016. A market trader called Tariq El-Tayyib, in response to harassment and petty corruption by officials, set fire to himself in protest sparking the Arab Spring. This set in chain a series of protests that resulted in the overthrow of the leaders of Libya, Egypt, Tunisia and Yemen, the attempted overthrow of the leaders of Syria and Bahrain and the reported deaths of 61,000. My personal one. Got on Reddit on I need a friend cause I was bored and lonely. Getting out of a stale, unhealthy and unhappy marriage. Moved to a new state alone. Got my own place. Gained independence and self-confidence I never dreamed I could have and met the love of my life. One lonely post on Reddit ended up changing the entire course of my life. I stopped at my favorite pizza joint 10 years ago. And they were closed because the cook's kid ate some bad lunch meat or something and was barfing all over. I walked across the street to another restaurant. There were no tables available, so I sat at the bar next to some girl. She smiled at me. We filed for divorce last week after 9 years. Lunch meat. I decided to try a new shortcut to work one day and ended up stuck in the most epic traffic jam of my life. Turns out, that shortcut was actually a detour through a construction zone, complete with confused drivers, angry honking, and me seriously reconsidering my navigational skills. Needless to say, I never took that shortcut again. I often wish that my parents had lived long enough to meet my son. However, after they die, I used part of my inheritance to buy a motorcycle. Through the motorcycle, I became reacquainted with an old friend. Through that friend I met my son's mother. So if they hadn't died when they did, I wouldn't have my son for them to meet. A big one that comes to my mind is when the HMS Olympic lost a propeller blade and brought to Belfast for repairs, postponing the construction on Titanic for a month. I've read that if Titanic set sail when originally planned, it would have crossed the Atlantic during a time of the year that ice wasn't as big of a threat. Gerard Way seeing the Twin Towers fall on 9/11, what inspired him to start My Chemical Romance. And My Chemical Romance inspired Stephenie Meyer to write Twilight, and all this lead to E.L. James writing a Twilight fanfiction and publishing it as 50 Shades of Grey. Conclusion: 9/11 caused 50 Shades of Grey. Watched Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and got so annoyed at the candidates not knowing a simple question about Katy Perry that I applied. Got in, got to play, won a lot of money, booked a holiday to a dream destination with that money. Met my husband there. We now have a 1-year-old son. My personal one bought some flashy look stamps in bulk for a stab at getting a new job. Discovered some had misprints which are oddly valuable in the stamp collecting world. Sold them. Got enough to tip me over the top on a down payment on a house. Got a much better job out of it, too. For trial, need for better DNA experts and less boring explanations, importance of televised court proceedings, and how jurors will take a little more than 4 hours to contemplate 9 months of testimony. November 22, 1963 was a bright sunny day in Dallas, Texas. If it had rained, there would have been a roof on the car. Another potentially huge difference could be the bullet trajectory from April 10, 1963, being an inch or two differently from the real one and hitting Edwin Walker. If Elian Gonzalez dies, or if his mother never gets in that boat, Al Gore likely becomes president in 2001, as possibly number 9/11 attacks. There is definitely no Iraq war. There's likely serious action on climate. Possibly no financial crisis in 2008, no Trump. Bush beating Gore in 2000 seems pretty important recently. We went from a budget surplus to tax cuts, huge deficits, 9/11, various wars, delayed action on climate change, and happened to current Supreme Court justices gain their positions. When I met my now best friend 4 years ago, him just being around me has been such a great time for me. He's one of the reasons my mental health hasn't completely declined. He's amazing and I love having him as a friend. Before becoming president, Ronald Reagan won a trip to California in a contest sponsored by Wheaties. While on the trip, he auditioned for a role that launched his acting career and then went into politics.